Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As many people are familiar as they approach midlife, especially women, one of the biggest concerns that they'll face is that of osteoporosis. This is one of those devastating things where bone density begins to deplete and people begin to feel aches and pains and eventually brittle bones and even breaking bones. There are many interesting things out there that people will present to be able to help prevent this or perhaps reverse this, but the question is whether or not they work. You know, those typical myths we see out there as people try to present a problem and a solution that may be able to solve that problem. On the program today, we're going to be joined by a guest who's been on the Beyond 50 radio program before, and for the last 30 years she has worked at government and university levels and lectured for medical professionals around the globe. She holds a Ph.D. in molecular and cellular biology, as well as additional degrees and many years of experience in genetic engineering, biochemistry, human tumor biology, and nutrition. She runs a wonderful place out of Tucson, Arizona, known as World Integrated Systems in Health, or simply known as WISH. Today we're going to be talking about how we can end osteoporosis, and I'd like to welcome back to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Dr. Sandy Bevacqua. Dr. Bevacqua, thank you for joining us back here on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
I got an idea this is going to be one of those eye-opening conversations, just like the last time when you were here on the program. So tell us about osteoporosis and why this is so important for people to know about this. Are you still there? Sounds like we got a little bit of a breaking up. Maybe we got a little bit of density that needs to be worked out here. Again.
Okay.
Oh, there she is. Okay, great.
So osteoporosis is a condition where bones become brittle and weak, and it causes them to break more easily than normal bone. And therein lies the rub, because it's the fractures that people suffer from that are truly the issue. And healthy bones are very important. They're the framework for our muscles. They're our storehouse for vital minerals. Our strong bones are needed to protect the heart, lungs, brain, and other organs from injury. And what we know right now is that quite a few people, in fact 1.5 million Americans, suffer a fracture due to weak bones every year. And oftentimes the falls that elderly, even middle-aged people have are an undetected fracture. In fact, 75%, we now know, 75% of significant falls end in undetected fractures. So oftentimes people are falling, breaking their bones, and they don't know it. And most common breaks are of the wrist, spine, and hip. And we have current stats that are telling us that of all 76-year-old people, 1/3 of women and 1/6 of men will have hip fractures. So this is a big deal. It's a really, really big deal, and it's also a great expense to our country. It's highly, hip fractures alone are very devastating. Hip fractures will cause 20% of those that have hip fractures will actually perish as a result. Another 20% end up in a nursing home, which is, of course, devastating for their life and for their finances. And many people that have these hip fractures become depressed, isolated, and they're afraid to leave their homes because they're afraid of falling again. Mm-hmm. So bone fractures are a huge deal and very important. It's costing the care for these are costing nearly $18 billion each year.
Wow, $18 billion. That's billion with a B there.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. And the cost for each individual, if you have a hip fracture, can cost $81,000 during their lifetime. So it's a huge cost, and that's the cost of lost wages as well as the cost of medical fees and care and. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal, and it's a huge issue in our country.
You know, what was interesting, Sandy, is that I was on Twitter just yesterday before this, today's interview here, and there was someone who had tweeted out about how a hip fracture can be life-changing. And I thought, well, yeah, no kidding. I think that could be life-changing to just about anybody, no matter what the age was. But I thought to myself, well, we're going to be talking about osteoporosis today. And so I thought I'd click on that and see what they had to say. And to me, it felt like the information is like something that you've heard out there before, and I didn't find that it was really, I guess, eye-opening enough to really resolve, I guess, the challenge of what this osteoporosis really is. And when you say that 1 out of 3 women, as they're, past the age of 50, and 1 out of 6 men are affected by this as well, my first question, I guess, would be, why are women more affected than men?
Well, it's, understand that first of all, for both women and men, this is a silent disease.
Right.
So it usually progresses without obvious signs or symptoms until the first fracture occurs. And then, oh my goodness, now we're doing bone density, now we're, there's prescriptions and yada yada. But it frequently is striking the postmenopausal women due to their declines in the estrogen. So estrogen helps women hold on to their bones. Actually, it helps men as well, but men don't go through menopause. They do andropause, and it's their testosterone that they're worried about. So, and it also occurs equally in men and women as a result of delayed puberty. So, but also, inadequate calcium intake. Now, women tend to use up more calcium than men because women sometimes have babies and they're breastfeeding. And it can be challenging to take in enough minerals to be able to make all that milk. So women have a couple of reasons why it's more prevalent in them. And, and there's certain medications that can interfere with bone health as well. But osteoporosis is actually a disease of the young, and it affects the elderly. So when this starts is when we're quite young. It starts with mom having poor nutrition, not enough vitamin D perhaps, and the child now being more susceptible later on in life. And depending on how well the child eats and cares for their bone health, that's going to, the status at birth and throughout their childhood to puberty is going to determine how susceptible they're going to be. But women are definitely more susceptible because of that drop in estrogen. That's the main reason.
Mm-hmm. Now, with what's available out there, like at least what we're told about, to me, I would think it's been interesting to hear some of the solutions and how you can prevent this and perhaps even reverse it. And one of the more interesting ones that I remember hearing over the years is from the American Dairy Association, drink more milk. And I thought, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Well, I can tell you from practice and, there's a lot of women that are taking in more calcium, whether they're drinking more milk, dairy products, taking in supplemental calcium, and I can tell you right now that it doesn't work. It might increase bone density by a little tiny bit, but not by as much as you would think. Now, most women or most people are going to need about 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams a day. But as a nation, we get about 200 to 500. So there is an issue with calcium. We are great calcium users, we humans. Mm-hmm. We need a lot of calcium, and that's why we're the only species that goes after the milk of another species. It's really quite odd, actually. But we're big calcium users, and those that take in a lot of green vegetables, green leaves, they're getting their calcium from leaves, and I think that's what we're actually supposed to be doing. But, dairy foods are a source of calcium. That's why we go after it. But I can tell you that replacing the calcium alone does not take care of bone. It will increase bone density a little bit, but it won't create a stronger bone. And I can tell you why. This is something that my program will be much different than what others are doing out there. Do you want to know?
Well, I believe that's why you're here on the program. We're talking about ending osteoporosis.
Well, here's the deal. Let's say you're building a house, and you're going to put up a house. Don't you put up a frame first? You put up a frame, and then you put the walls on the frame, right? You have to have a foundation, and then a frame to the house. Well, what is the frame of a bone? What is the foundation? Mm-hmm. What are we putting the calcium on?
It would be bone marrow, I would guess, right?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
that's the hollow part in the middle.
You're the PhD. I just hold a radio host's degree.
Okay. So what it is it's the protein matrix that holds up the bone. That not only creates strength, but it creates flexibility. And what I'm finding is the number of issues with bone, and I'm going to tell you, every single individual is treated program. The main number one reason that people are not getting their bones strong is because they either don't take in enough protein foods or they cannot digest the protein foods. And because of that, the matrix of the bone becomes weakened. Now, no matter how much calcium or other minerals you throw in there, there's no place for it to attach to. There's no matrix, so you have a very weak house. Like, the Three Little Pigs, okay, the house made out of straw. So what we want is the house made out of bricks and have really strong matrix. But in this case, it becomes better than the brick. It's flexible and it's strong. And when you have a very strong matrix to the bone, now you have a matrix that you can add mineral onto, and you have a strong and flexible bone. And one of the biggest problems that are happening right now is a lot of people are using medications, Fosamax, any of the bisphosphonate medications. And these meds are very good at forcing minerals onto the bone. Okay, that's what they do. And we can look at, in fact, I was just looking up some of the different medications so people can identify them. Actonel, Boniva, Bonafos, Didronel, Aridia, Skelid, and Zomita. These are all bisphosphonate medications. And what they do is they force mineral onto what little matrix those poor people have. And what it does is it increases the bone density a little bit. Mm-hmm. There's a small increase, but not a huge increase, not as much as you would think. In fact, there's all kinds of suits now going against Merck and other producers of bisphosphonates. And the reasons are because those people, after years of using them, have an increased risk of catastrophic fractures. Catastrophic fractures meaning that the bones shatter. Mm-hmm. So if you have a very weak matrix and you really pound it with minerals, what you've made is a very brittle bone, but it's still weak and it's definitely not flexible. So when it breaks, it shatters. And that's exactly what's happening. And so there's, in fact, I think the second Fosamax case won $8 million for the plaintiff due to actually that one was not even a catastrophic break. That was another problem with the bisphosphonates, and that is osteonecrosis of the jaw. It's called dead jaw syndrome, and that's something else. If you take one of these medications for 5 years or more, you have an increased chance of having one of those diseases. And it's again very hidden. You go to the dentist says, "Gee, there's a problem." They pull a tooth. They find a necrotic bone in the jaw, and they have to dig it out. And it's one operation after another, and it's a lot of suffering. It's awful. Mm-hmm. And people oftentimes will lose their teeth and a lot of their jawbone as a result of it. So this is a huge problem. So this is the medication route is to increase the amount of mineral, drive it into the bone, but somehow it seems to be interfering with the circulatory system. It's clogging the works, and it's causing necrosis of bone, or bone is dying. So what are we going to do instead? Let's go ahead and make flexible, strong bone by getting enough protein into the bloodstream and strengthening the matrix. Then you put mineral on it. So calcium is not the most important nutrient for building bone. Protein is. Now, in some people, that's not the issue. Oftentimes it is, though. I'm going to say that once we do blood chemistry and we take a close look, I'd say 90 to 95% of the clients that we work with have some kind of protein issue. And we identify what that issue is. Maybe it's problems with digestion. Oftentimes it is. So we take care of that issue. Get more protein into the bloodstream, the bones get stronger fast. And then it's very easy to build up the density. Not a problem. We have a 4-month turnaround, and we have people's density increasing, but they don't end up with catastrophic breaks later on. So that's the beauty of the program. Mm-hmm. Another problem could be vitamin D stores. And a lot of women actually are having babies with soft skulls because they didn't have enough vitamin D while they were pregnant. So that's a big issue. So, you know about the vitamin D issue. I'm sure you've heard some about it, haven't you?
Well, not only have we heard about it, but we've actually featured whole programs on the importance of vitamin D, which, interestingly enough, back in the day, and we're talking about 8-9 years ago that we talked about this, is that you really weren't hearing a whole lot about that. You're starting to a little bit, but it's like here and there, and it's much like this osteoporosis issue here, is when you talk about billions of dollars, that this is actually costing, that's up there with all this cancer awareness, but yet you're not really hearing a whole lot about this.
No. And vitamin D deficiency does increase the chance of getting not only osteoporosis, but osteoarthritis, autoimmune illness, all kinds of cancers. Mm-hmm. It causes chronic pain. Lots of people have aches and pains, and when they get their vitamin D stores up to normal, their pain goes away. And I was one of those people. But I learned about this about 12 years ago and wrote an article that was not accepted for publication because nobody knew about vitamin D back then.
Right.
But since then, I've published a number of articles about this, and I am a big proponent of testing and making sure vitamin D stores are correct. And the number that should come in on the blood score should be between 65 and 100. And in some areas, the range on the blood test is so low because so many people in that area are deficient. So, the range comes from the population that goes to the lab. So if the population is very deficient, the range will be so low that normal, the level that we like for good bone growth, might be above the range. Mm-hmm. And it scares doctors. So 65 to 100 is where you want to be. Most ranges are hitting between 30 and 100. 30 to 100, 35 to 100, somewhere in there. Some ranges are as low as 20 to 70, and that's crazy low. Mm-hmm. But I'm here in Tucson. It's a sunny place. You would think that everybody around here gets plenty of vitamin D, but that's not the truth. We're really good at wearing big floppy hats and long sleeves and long slacks, and we protect ourselves. And even just an SPF 8 sunblock will block 90% of our vitamin D production. Mm. So, being out in the sun, and it's the midday sun that you'll get the most vitamin D, especially during the summer. So people that go out in the sun during the summertime, that's a great thing to do, to get enough D. But here in Tucson, we never go out in the sun in the middle of the day in the summer. You could die. Mm-hmm. So I run into people in the desert Southwest, Southern California, New Mexico, and all the southern states with single-digit numbers in their vitamin D, 8, 6. They have almost none. And so this is a big deal, and it can make a huge change to bone health. So there's protein and vitamin D, the two most important nutrients. Mm-hmm. Okay? Go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say was, you know, when it comes to vitamin D and you're describing how people should get out in midday, of course, and absorb sunlight because that is a source of vitamin D, is being able to convert that into vitamin D, which, as you said, is a very important source of protein. As you said, is the matrix or the foundational building block for building healthy and flexible bones. Mm-hmm. Now, first of all, it's fascinating when you think, okay, well, a bone is made of calcium, that we tend to chase the surface problem, if you will. So we say, well, if you're low in calcium, if your bones are becoming weak and brittle, well, then what we need is more calcium. You know, that we tend to chase the problem with that sort of surface level problem when you're saying that, well, no, in fact, what we need to do is be building our protein and protein reserves, it sounds like. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, when it comes to the vitamin D issue, that with, you know, cancer becoming, to me, seeming to be a fashion statement more than anything, and I know it's just an opinion that I have, but you look at it, you look at the way it's being displayed, and that one of the things they talk about is how you can prevent getting skin cancer. Well, you stay out of the sun. You don't want too much exposure to that, so everybody's running around overprotecting themselves, and now what they're doing is unwittingly creating another challenge for themselves, which is blocking the ability to have vitamin D, which is blocking the ability to build protein, which in the end begins to deplete calcium, which causes all these problems such as osteoporosis. And you think to yourself, how do we find out what the right thing to do is? Because most of the time, people glean their information from watching talk shows and news shows, or possibly reading out of a magazine or a newspaper. And you kind of have to scratch your head and say, but where does a person start to find out what the right thing to do really is?
Well, address a number of comments that you made.
I tried to keep it to one, but it became hard as you could see the systemic effect of all of this.
Yeah, it is a systemic issue. Okay, first of all, you mentioned, if you go out in the sun, you'll get more chance of having sun cancer, and this is something that we're very aware of here in Tucson is the second center in the world of skin cancer, so we're real aware of that. And in this area, what we do is with vitamin D. We don't send people out in the sun. And honestly, even I've had roofers come in that don't have enough vitamin D for good bone health, and they're in the sun all day long.
Right.
So there's also there's other issues with vitamin D. And I'm going to make a prediction, and that is that vitamin D is also used for detoxifying the body. There's not a lot of data behind what I'm saying, but I think that the more toxic our environment gets, the more likely we are to have vitamin D deficiency. I'm running into people that need a lot of vitamin D, way more than you could if you were living naked in the sun in a sunny area, you wouldn't be able to make this much vitamin D.
Wow.
So people are supplementing with huge amounts, and I think the reason is because they've taken in that much toxin from their environment. We're getting barraged with toxins, and I see that the people that have high toxic levels in their urine, in their tissues, and we do tests to look at this. Someone wants to do that, and those that have high toxic levels are burning up their D. They are the ones that are using up a ton of D, and I think that the more toxic our environment gets, the more likely we are to have vitamin D issues. The other thing about vitamin D is that it's absolutely essential for hormone production. And
Bandy, it sounds like we lost you there again as we're talking about how we could reverse and actually strengthen our vitamin D and our protein levels so that we can have better bone density and flexibility. So going out there and chasing things such as supplements, for instance, taking in calcium, may not do the trick as well as medications, as she was explaining earlier, can really cause more of the problems, because what it tends to do, from my understanding, is it's sort of like if you go out there to paint a house that has really bad rotting wood. What you're essentially doing is that you're taking the foundation, which is already weak, and you're just putting something over the top of it, which eventually masks and hides the problem, and in the end causes more problems. And hopefully Sandy will be back here on the program here. It sounds like we kind of got cut off there a little bit to talk about how this program that she shows works to be able to help people to be able to address this issue. As she was saying earlier in the program, billions of dollars a year go into treating osteoporosis, and yet very few of us really hear much about this. And it's time to find out what are the good answers out there that are very effective and actually cause things to be able to turn around for people, especially as they approach midlife and beyond. If you want to find out more about Dr. Sandy Bevacqua, World Integrated Health Systems, you can find out at her website, which is www.wishforlife.com. And you can find out more about her work, a lot of the things that she has going on there, as well as events and how you can contact and, in fact, get her mailing list or her newsletter, which I believe comes out monthly. And she was just recently talking about how a lot of people tend to think they can increase their vitamin D levels by simply being out in the sun. The challenge with that is, she was saying, even people who are in the business of roofing, for instance, take off their shirts, they're absorbing that sun all day long. And even as Dr. Sandy Bevacqua had said, that you could be out there running around naked all day absorbing the sun, and you won't even get near the levels of vitamin D that you need. And why she says that's very important is that vitamin D is one of those components that help actually build healthy protein levels. So really the goal isn't so much to realize that perhaps we're low in calcium, which could cause bone density to decrease, if you will, is the fact that adding calcium really doesn't handle the issue in as much as what we need to do is build a strong foundation of protein. So finding ways to be able to build the protein matrix, as she was describing earlier in the program, is probably the greatest way to be able to get that bone density up to what we need it to be. And when you think about things such as the possibility of gaining, a lot of sicknesses and certain diseases as a result of a loss of calcium and bone density, that we might want to consider ways that we can actually restore these foundational things that we're losing, as she described, in such ways as body toxification. Apparently there is a lot in our environment, and as we've talked about here on the program before, there are a lot of ways that you can find yourself becoming very toxic. There's the air we breathe, there's the water that we drink, and there's the food that we eat. And it's being able to take that very first step to find out, first of all, how do we really prevent or at least reduce the amount of toxification that our body takes in. As you well know, for many of you who listen to our program, the body is a very intelligent system. It has its ability that, when properly supported, has an astounding way of being able to rebound and to rebuild itself. So the question comes that once a person perhaps has osteoporosis, is it possible to reverse osteoporosis at any particular age? Now, I'm not a doctor, but we certainly love to bring experts here on the Beyond 50 radio program to address that very issue. And that's why Dr. Sandy Bevacqua is here on the program today, but it seems that we have lost her, so we have plenty of good information. We'll certainly bring her back here on the program. But again, you can find out more by visiting World Integrated Systems in Health, or simply known as WISH, such as Make-A-Wish, like a genie. So you can find out more by simply visiting www.wishforlife.com. And certainly, if we can't get her back here on the air, perhaps we'll have her on the program again here real soon, so we can continue to find out what we can do about rebuilding and replacing these things that essentially we're beginning to lose that are causing problems in our health, especially in the area such as bone density, which affects, as she was saying, more than 1 million Americans each year. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today. You can find out more about us by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50, beyond50radio.com. We do have a wonderful update newsletter that we encourage you to sign up for there. It comes out every week by email. It's absolutely free. So go to www.beyond50radio.com. And we'll also have a link there so you can find out more about Dr. Sandy Bevacqua's work and find out how you can overcome osteoporosis. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.